A while ago, in an email to a friend, I expressed the opinion that dog worship is a cult. This is part of his reply. Quote, although dog adoration has some of the characteristics of a religious type movement, I don't believe it is a cult. A cult normally has a leader. Dog worship doesn't. It also usually has some type of organizational structure, usually to meet the needs of and glorify the leader. Dog worship has no recognizable monolithic structure. Cult members are usually exploited by the leader in some way, psychologically, financially, or sexually. There are manipulative and narcissistic characters in dog-based organizations, but they usually take advantage of the organization rather than its members. Dog worship is too amorphous to be a cult. End quote. I had posted this comment, and some of you disagreed with me. That made me put more thought into the idea. My own history and experiences led me to consider it as a cult. Those of you who have been following this channel will know that I have often referred to dog worship as a cult. My own history influenced me in the following way. I have made no secret of the fact that I used to be a dog owner, and I accepted that dogs were wonderful creatures that made our lives complete. I obviously no longer believe that to be the case. From being someone I believed loved dogs, I became disgusted and sickened by their presence. I have chronicled this journey in my video, Dog Lover to Dog Hater, A Journey. Before I made that particular video, I had occasionally thought about what made me change my mind, but never in any great depth. When I sat down to think about it, I realized that my change of mind was a long time in developing. Many of my views about animals and nature and about inequalities advanced slowly over time, bit by bit, until my pregnancy and childbirth acted as a trigger for my attitudes to dogs that were bubbling under the surface of my awareness. Before I made my video about the journey to being a dog hater, I wasn't too sure what had brought about the transformation. One conclusion I came to was that I must have been brainwashed or influenced in some way to act against my best interests in coveting a dog. The only thing I could compare it to was being in a cult. 2 years ago, I watched a video entitled Dog Worship Cult on the I Hate Dogs YouTube channel. And I was influenced by the content because it fitted in with what I believed at the time. Many of my viewers referred to dog worship as a cult, so the idea is influential and widespread. Looking at what you, my viewers, have written is both illuminating and thought-provoking. You have presented a wide variety of explanations for the adoration of dogs. You have discussed social psychology, sociology, personality types, social pressure, the power of advertising, and the politics of big business, among other attempts to arrive at a suitable explanation for an extraordinary phenomenon. When dog owners try to explain why they value dogs so highly, their explanations are filled with factoids, falsehoods, and faulty logic. They don't know, and that is perplexing for us because we don't know either. We are at a disadvantage, watching from the sidelines at the astonishingly irrational human beliefs and behaviors around dogs. We look on in amazement as dogs kill, injure, destroy, provoke, cause fear, transmit diseases, and all the other things they do to damage society and ecology. Despite abundant evidence to the contrary, dogs are elevated to a high status and hailed as saviors. We are all familiar with the much repeated phrase, "We don't deserve them." No wonder we look to cults as a means of explaining all of this. I have done so in the past, and I have come to realize that my use of the word cult was far too casual. The problem with being too loose and casual about the use of the word cult is that almost any group of people could be described as a cult. Overuse of the word cult means that it just describes something we don't agree with or we don't think much of. I am vegan, and I have come across veganism being described as a cult, and have even been told that I am a member of a cult simply because I am vegan. In some cases, the word is so loosely used that it has become an insult for any belief system that is different to your own. Such a use of the word cult is little more than a new four-letter word. We see different groups of people with different belief systems described as cults. Some of them are based on religion, some of them are not. Some of them expect their followers to carry out extreme acts, while others do not. Robert J. Lifton, a psychiatrist writing in the 1980s, described three primary characteristics that defined a cult. These are 1. A charismatic leader, 2. A process of indoctrination, and 3. Economic, sexual, and other exploitation of the members by the leader. These characteristics are almost 40 years old, and not only have cults been more widely studied since then, but society has also moved on. Exchange of information, beliefs, and values is much more direct and rapid than in the early 80s, thanks to social media. Because of social media, we have seen the rise of leaderless groups and leaderless movements. Future studies may wish to consider whether or not leaderless groups are a form of cult. It is essential to differentiate between cults and other groups. For example, while many cults operate within a religious framework, it is essential to separate them out from mainstream religion. A religion is something very different from a cult. More recent studies on cults have developed the three-part list devised by Robert J. Lifton and have produced more lengthy and detailed lists of characteristics. An example is an organization called Cult Research that has a long list of characteristics of a cult and of the management of a cult. Another that produces a long list is the International Cultic Studies Association. Some of the features on their lists could describe dog worshippers, but people in love with dogs would fulfill very few of the characteristics of any of these cult lists. The beliefs that dog worshippers have are illogical and fly in the face of evidence. Some of their beliefs have religious type elements. For example, the idea that dog is God spelled backwards. While dog worship has some qualities of a religion, it is not a religion. While it has some qualities of a cult, it is not a cult. While there are some organized elements among dog worshippers, it is not organized. During virus lockdown, the increase in the purchase of dogs was attributed by many as a response to loneliness. Whether or not a dog eases loneliness is another matter, but such a belief illustrates the fact that many dog owners and dog worshippers are people on their own with little or no contact with those with similar interests. This doesn't sound like a cult. People share a broad belief system but are fragmented and not in contact with a group. Some dog owners are socially isolated and lonely individuals with only their dog for company. These people have little or no contact with other dog owners. Some dog owners value their own dog and no other, whereas other dog owners profess to loving all dogs. In my video, Dog Ownership is Cruel, Love is Hate, Hate is Love, I reach the conclusion that they do not love dogs, they only profess to do so. Many owners of dogs are wary or frightened of large dogs or dogs with a reputation for aggression. For example, there is a Reddit page devoted to banning pit bulls. Many of the contributors there are dog owners. Some dog owners support breed-specific legislation, while others have the attitude that the more aggressive the breed, the happier they are, and, as I have discussed before, will divert, victim blame, and lie to protect dogs that maim and kill. There is too much of a diversity of opinion in the dog-loving world to explain the phenomenon as a cult. All they have in common is the desire to bring a predatory carnivore into their homes and our societies. The cult argument would have to be extended to suggest a number of different cults informing and manipulating people. There are organized groups, but many are at odds with the others. Some represent a particular type of dog. Some are involved in providing food and shelter for dogs. Some provide legal representation for dogs and their owners, and others have other specific aims related to dogs. This is not indicative of a cult. There may be cults within such a mix, but the mix is too disparate to operate as a large cult with shared objectives. Many dog owners will criticize other dog owners for exactly the same reasons that we do. The difference is that while we want dogs out of society, they want dog-based antisocial behavior modified so that dogs can be more easily accepted and assimilated. This is often the case when people want the same thing, but for different reasons and for different outcomes. Jenna Stragowski, a veterinarian of over 20 years' experience, writing in a column for Spruce Pets, lists 10 reasons why people hate your dog. Her motive is to make dogs more acceptable to society, but what she lists could be agreed upon by most of us dog haters. Our conclusions would be different. Another point is that she has missed out important points that most dog haters would have high on the list. 3 that come to mind are dogs kill and injure people and animals, dogs spread diseases, and dogs harm the environment. The important point here is that this is a woman who believes that she loves dogs, criticizing other people who claim to love dogs, and she is published in a mainstream pro-dog website. This doesn't happen with cults. While there is dissent and criticism in the dog-owning world, it is usually about how to make dogs more acceptable to society, rather than seeing dogs as a pest animal. Before I move on to suggest an alternative possibility, I would like to relate an anecdote to illustrate my point that dog owners are not a uniform group. A friend told me that his sister, Jane, was walking her Chihuahua dog when she met up with a neighbor, Dave, who was also walking his Chihuahua. Dave's dog, which was off leash, suddenly ran forward and bit a stranger on the leg. The victim shouted out in pain, and Dave started to shout at the man that his dog was nowhere near him and hadn't bitten him. The man offered to show Dave the wound, but Dave replied that the man was a liar and would scratch himself to mimic a dog bite. Dave then got his phone out and claimed to be calling the police because the stranger was harassing him. Jane's response was to walk over to the victim, write her name and address on a piece of paper, then tell the man that if this goes any further, she would act as a witness supporting his version of events. She then went over to Dave and said to him, "If you ever see me again, don't even look in my direction. As far as I'm concerned, you don't exist." Now, if these two dog owners are cult members, then they must belong to separate cults. So, what could be the alternative to cult membership? The nature of the dog worship phenomenon has more in common with a fad or a trend than with a cult. People will follow fads and trends at the drop of a hat. Many fashion trends and fashion taboos of the past would now be seen as crazy. In 19th century photos, you can see people at the seaside in summer, dressed in cumbersome clothes that must have been uncomfortable and would have had them sweating. They weren't dressing for comfort, they were dressing according to the fad of the time. A recent article about the TV series The Queen's Gambit suggested that the recent increased popularity of chess was a direct byproduct of the TV miniseries. That's how easily influenced people are. It's the same with dogs. Different decades have had different favorite dogs. The Salukis and Afghan hounds of the 1960s were an accessory to complement the fashion of the day. The appearance of one breed of dog can vary considerably according to the fad or fancy of the time. An article in All Things Dogs illustrates 12 best poodle cuts and hairstyles from the 1950s to now. The appearance of the dog, even to the color of its coat, would vary according to the prevailing trend. Such trends come from a variety of sources, such as the preferences of celebrities and influencers, movie scenes, TV programs, adverts, and so on. The greater the status of the celebrity, the more likely people are to copy their favored dog. We don't have to go back far to remember the popularity of tiny dogs kept in purses or handbags. Living animals become part of the fashion industry, accessories to raise the status and fashion profile of the owners. Dogs become part of other trends, more of a cross trend than a cross breed. Not only can we follow celebrities on their Instagram pages or on other social media platforms, we can follow their dogs as well, as if these animals are celebrities in their own rights. Much of this may appear trivial and would be more likely to explain a short-lived and limited fad or fancy. There have been trends of behaviors that lasted over time and spread widely across societies. One that comes to mind is what is sometimes referred to as the dancing plague. The main outbreak occurred in France in 1518. People would dance to the point of exhaustion and sometimes to death. That outbreak disappeared as quickly and as mysteriously as it began. But there are a number of other instances spreading over hundreds of years. Also referred to as Saint Vitus's dance, Saint John's dance, and dancing mania. There are instances recorded from the 7th century to the 17th. The causes are unknown, and suggestions vary from ergot poisoning to mass hysteria. Ergot is a fungus that grows on rye and barley. The most widely held belief now is that it was a form of psychological contagion. It could have been a form of mass hysteria, but it is difficult to explain how so many people came to experience similar symptoms at the same time. Other explanations have been sought by looking at the dancing as a form of social experience. The author of an article in Ancient Origins suggests the following. Quote, perhaps it may be suggested that some of those engaged in the St. John's dance did so out of fear, while others danced in order to fit in with the crowd. End quote. Does this seem a likely explanation for the worship of dogs? It could be argued that these events happened a long time ago and in different societies, but there is a modern parallel to dancing mania, and that is the outbreak of hysterical laughter. On January 30th, 1962, in a boarding school in Kashasha, Tanganyika, 3 girls started to laugh. Soon others started to laugh, and it spread through the school among students between the ages of 12 and 18. It then spread to other places, and the phenomenon lasted for 18 months. Stress-induced hysteria has been suggested as the cause of this outbreak, but also social influence. A cult is a form of extreme social influence, so that would fit with dog worship behavior looking like a cult. Social influence and social pressure are more likely explanations. I have given you the results of my reading and deliberation, but feel free to come to whatever conclusion you want about cults. But remember one thing. If we suggest that dog owners belong to a cult, then they have an equal right to consider us a cult, and probably for the same reasons. We are a fairly small group on this channel, and there are unknown millions of people who dislike dogs or are frightened of them, but remain silent and uncomplaining. The puzzle is why. It could be that they don't want to buck the trend. It could be that they know dog worshippers will try to isolate and marginalize them. Owning a dog does give people a sense of belonging, a sense of inclusion. Not owning a dog and not going along with the trend marks you as an outsider. The silence of uncomplaining dog haters could be the opposite side of the coin to following fashion. That is apathy. Social opinions generate trends, and social approval helps to develop them and keep them nurtured. A dog-free future has to come from withdrawing social support and approval for dog worship. I ended my journey video by saying that the future is pet-free, and changing attitudes to pet keeping may be part of the future solution to the dog pest problem. The ones who remain silent and uncomplaining are complicit in the continuation of this dog-based mess. If we can reach these people, we can reverse the dog worship trend. Then we have a better chance of making the future dog-free.